music world. We're about to bring in our guest, Robin Edgar, who's going to be discussing with me Unitarian Universalist clergy sex abuse cover up and other things. So I'm going to give him a call and then we will be happy to add him in.
Hello.
Hi, Robin. This is Eddie G from Eddie G's Music World.
Hello. Are you on the air already? Or?
Yeah, we are on. We have everything set up.
Right.
Things are plugged into the right spot.
Right.
The reason why I did it the way I did it last time, I'll tell you the truth. I follow Charlie Chaplin's grandson, and he said silent movies are making a comeback. So
Right.
he said, why don't you do a silent one? But I think
Right.
I'm going to ignore the guy next time.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to help. Anyway, this
Right.
is Robin Edgar, and we're going to discuss today Unitarian Universalist clergy sex abuse cover-up. So at first, why don't you tell me a little bit about what the cover-up entailed? What were they covering up? What the details were about this cover-up that you want to discuss?
Right. Well, there's different levels of cover-up and denial of clergy sexual misconduct in the Unitarian Universalist Church, as there is in other churches and religions. Some of it I have absolutely nothing to do with. Some of it was happening even before I became aware of it. But then since I became aware, of the clergy sexual misconduct issue, since I became aware that many victims, most of whom were women, were coerced into signing non-disclosure agreements, so it was kept hidden. That's one way to keep the clergy sexual misconduct hidden, is to have the victims sign non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements, because then it's basically everyone has to keep hush about it. And so I was told about this situation, where quite a lot of female victims had been silenced. So I'm not silenced, close agreement, so I can speak out about this. I may not be able to speak out about exactly what happened with the individual women that were silenced, but I can talk about the situation in general. And I think by the time I learned this, I was already protesting non-sexual clergy abuse, clergy misconduct by the minister of the Unitarian Church of Montreal outside the church. So I was already in my protest. It had already started, but it was about non-sexual clergy abuse that I'd experienced. And so I just added that to my protest. I just added that issue. And I wasn't, I didn't zero in on the sexual misconduct aspect. I was already protesting clergy abuse. And when you say clergy abuse or abuse of clergy, people think in terms of sexual abuse anyway. So I didn't add sexual words to my picket signs, but I did make one picket sign that hinted at sexual misconduct in the church, and it was just two words. It was unsafe sex, which is, of course, pun on safe sex. At least I hope people got that. So I had this picket sign. It was unsafe sex and a question mark. With other picket signs that spoke about clergy abuse. So, and if people ask me questions, I would tell them about it. So basically, I was talking about that issue on my blog, the Emerson and Edgar blog. I blogged about a few cases of clergy sexual misconduct, quite serious sexual misconduct. Even to say sexual misconduct is almost it's almost minimizing it, because we're talking about rape of teenage girls. Unitarian Universalist Tibetan refugee. It's actually plural, but there's one in particular. So there's one teenage Tibetan refugee in particular who he told the family, look, if you give your daughter into my care, I'll take her to America, and I'll make sure she's properly cared for, and I'll get her an education, and so on. And so they gave to him their daughter, basically to be in his care, I guess like a foster daughter. And I think when this happened, when she was first given over to him, she was 16. And then he proceeded to use her like a sex slave for several years. He would, go into her room and have sex with her, essentially rape her because it was not consensual. And eventually what happened is she was able to break free from him after some years. I think it wasn't until her early 20s that she reported him to the police. And he was arrested, and he was charged with rape, forcible rape, also what they call unnatural rape. You can sort of leave that up to the imagination. And he was convicted, and he went to jail.
Wow.
He didn't go to jail for a long time. I think he had an 8-year sentence, of which he only served about 4. So when you think about it, he was in jail for longer than or I should say shorter than the number of years that he used this teenage Tibetan refugee as a sex slave, essentially. So I blogged about this, and my sources of information were some newspaper reports. That confirmed that it happened. Like this had been reported in the newspapers. But I also had other sources of information. But I kept what was in my blog post pretty well in conformity with what was available in the newspapers. Like I didn't really say anything that you couldn't read in the newspapers because I wanted to avoid being accused of libel or slander or anything like that, or at least to be able to successfully defend myself if I was. There was another case, and it wasn't even a minister. It was a parishioner, and he had been convicted of raping young girls, like 12 and under. Some estimates estimated that he might have begun raping these young girls as young as 6 years old, but certainly somewhere between 9 and 12. So I described him as a pedophile rapist, and they were definitely trying to keep this hush-hush, even after he'd been convicted. So he'd been convicted, he went to jail, and this was reported in the newspapers. And then here's the interesting thing. I found out about this because a Unitarian Universalist minister was blogging about Roman Catholic clergy sexual misconduct. She was blogging about a particular case. I think it was an American politician. I can't remember his name, who had been accusing or had used being molested by a Roman Catholic priest as an excuse for something, if I remember correctly. So she was stridently attacking the Roman Catholic Church on her blog, and I saw this and I thought, well, it's all well and good to scream and yell at the Roman Catholic Church, but you've got problems in your own religion. Maybe you should talk about that. So in the comment section, I brought up the Mack case. I said, hey, what about Reverend Mack Mitchell raping teenage Tibetan refugees and so on? And this minister deleted my comments.
Wow.
Like she would delete them, and so that to me that's covering up. If I come along and put a comment on your blog asking about or talking about clergy sex abuse in your church, and you delete the comment, well that's part of keeping it hidden. And so I made an issue of this, and she kept deleting my comments, and she made stupid excuses. Oh, we're talking about Roman Catholic abuse here. We're not talking about abuse in our church. We can do that some other time, kind of thing, And she was blogging anonymously to her identity wasn't known. Um, so I wanted to out her. I wanted to identify, who this Unitarian Universalist minister was, who was essentially, trying to keep rape committed by Unitarian Universalist minister hidden, at least not on her blog. And I did a little online detective work, and I found a prime suspect. I went to the church newsletter of that prime suspect, and in the church newsletter, they had a little section, and it was about a special congregational meeting of the church with another Unitarian Universalist minister who I knew was a minister who dealt with clergy misconduct issues. So here they were having this special church meeting to deal with, I think they said, in the notice it said the recent conviction of Richard Mule or something like that.
Right.
So I thought, oh, don't tell me another Unitarian Universalist minister is being convicted of something, And so I had the name Richard Mule. So I Googled that, and I found a newspaper report about this parishioner of this minister who had been convicted of what I already said, raping preteen girls, including a female family member who was probably his granddaughter. So this was, pedophile rapist, essentially. So then I started talking about that. Of course, she's deleting all my comments about that. So this is a case of an individual, trying to keep that stuff hidden, and the church, like their notice in the church newsletter, it was very carefully worded, so it was very vague. You didn't know what it was about. So I blogged about him. So I blogged about Reverend Mack Wallace Mitchell. I blogged about Richard Mule, and this would have been in 2006.
Right.
So my blog posts, they're still there. You can go read them. You do the appropriate search and so on. So in 2012, June 1st, I get an email in my email inbox from Stikeman Elliott Barristers and Solicitors Defamation Lawyer, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulomb. What's that all about? And I noticed in my web stats that Stikeman Elliott had been visiting the Emerson Avenger blog in the previous week. So I'd seen evidence of this lawsuit and visiting the blog and having a look at it. And in the demand letter, he accused me of a variety of things, but one of the things he said towards the end of the letter, and this is pretty well an exact quote, he said, your unfounded and vicious allegations to the affected ministers of the association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape are defamatory, and he went on to say that they're so defamatory that they constitute blasphemous libel. So this is clearly an attempt, because they wanted me to take down the blog post. The whole idea is like, if you don't take down the blog post, you're going to be charged with this crime of blasphemous libel. Like, I didn't even know what it was. I had to look it up. Like, I knew what blasphemy meant or blasphemous meant. I knew what libel meant, but I'd never seen those two words together in a phrase, blasphemous libel. So I Googled blasphemous libel and discovered that in the Canadian Criminal Code, excuse my frog in my throat, haven't had my first coffee yet. I found this. It was a crime, to blaspheme against a religion. So they're accusing me of blasphemy for blogging about their pedophiles and rapists. So I knew that what I'd written was not unfounded, and actually based on newspaper reports. So I knew that I was not guilty of this crime at all, and that it was basically a lie on their part to say that my blog posts were unfounded, because they were well positioned to know that I was telling the truth. So it was a lie right in the legal letter.
If I may ask, I just want to ask one question.
Yeah.
Now, that all being said, which is quite interesting and revealing about what's gone on, when you've approached professional journalists, specifically or among them CBC, what has been their reaction like when you bring it to light that it's newsworthy, these stories? What has been the general media reply to your trying to expose this these crimes that are going on?
Right. Well, here's the thing, and I'm not just trying to expose the crimes. I'm also trying to expose the fact that the church is covering them up, because it's one thing to have a certain number of pedophiles and rapists in your religious community. It's another thing to protect them and to try and conceal that. Every large group, let's say 1,000 people or more, is going to have a certain number of pedophiles and rapists. It's pretty well inevitable, and some of them are going to get caught and they're going to go to jail and so on. So what I found incredible was here the church was actually trying to hide it even after they were convicted and went to jail. So getting back to the media, when I was accused of blasphemous libel, I said, now this is newsworthy. Here's this church accusing me of violating a blasphemy law to hide pedophilia, right? That's a newsworthy story. And I did try to approach the media, and I got nowhere. I can't remember all the details, but I got nowhere. But here's the thing. I had already been telling Sue Montgomery, the Gazette Justice reporter, in the past about other issues with the Unitarian Church. I'd been asking her to report on the protest against clergy abuse outside the Unitarian Church in Montreal. She was a member of the Unitarian Church in Montreal, and she always refused to report on the problems in her own church, not just the church locally, but the larger religious community, the Unitarian Universalist religious community in North America. And I had some circumstantial evidence which suggested that she was telling Gazette editors and maybe other journalists that, there's no clergy abuse in the Unitarian Church. Robin doesn't know what he's talking about. I've looked into it. There's nothing there. So she was running interference in that sense inside the Gazette. There was clear circumstantial evidence pointing to that. And what I think happened is that she was actually running interference even outside of the Gazette. She was telling other journalists in other media, Robin doesn't know what he's talking about. He's full of it. I've looked into the stuff and there's nothing there. There's no clergy abuse and so on. And so I think she was a contributing factor even outside of the Gazette. And now I have evidence of that. Now she's doing it very publicly. So since you brought up the media, that's essentially what happened. I would try to get them to report, especially on this false accusation of blasphemous libel. And they wouldn't. It never happened. It never got anywhere. And I'm still not getting anywhere. Just over a week ago, I think it was Sunday a week ago, not last Sunday, but the one before, they were talking about, I think, a closely related issue on CBC All in a Weekend. And it was, I won't name her, but there was a female CBC journalist who was a reporter who was the host for the weekend show, All in a Weekend, I think they call it. And she, in the past, had interviewed Sue Montgomery about my alleged criminal harassment of Sue Montgomery and so on in a previous program, actually a couple of years ago, I think in 2019. And in that interview, Sue Montgomery had straight up said there's no sexual abuse in the Unitarian Church. So she had told this journalist there's no sexual abuse in the Unitarian Church when there clearly is. And I had tried to get a correction. I tried to get CBC to report what the actual truth is, and they hadn't. They refused. So every now and then I remind them of that, So that's what happened. They're talking about a related issue. So I sent in a couple of texts on the text line saying, hey, what about this? When are you going to fix this problem? And then I decided to call the newsroom to follow up on that, to make sure that they got the text. So I called the newsroom, and a male journalist answered. He was actually quite professional. And I asked him, I said, did you get the text that I just sent in on the text line? And he said, no, I don't have access to the text. I'm working from home, so I can't access the text. He said, the best thing you can do is send an email to Assignment Montreal exactly the same thing. At some point in this interview with Caroline, which was after my acquittal for the criminal harassment charges, she said there's no such sexual abuse. I've looked into it.
Wow.
So she's saying, A, there's no such sexual abuse, i.e. pedophilia, rape, and so on and so forth. And B, I've looked into it. She's saying, like I'm the authority here. I know what I'm talking about. I'm the journalist, and I've looked into it, and there's nothing new. She said this live on the air with Caroline on a national CBC radio show. So I have a bone to pick about that, too. And believe me, I did. And again, when Sue did this, I went to the CBC. First I went to Carol off, and then as it happens, and hey, you got to correct this. This isn't right. This is false information that you're spreading. And they refused. They did not correct that yet. It's been a couple of years now, and I'm still trying to get them to correct it. I took it to the CBC ombudsman when they refused to correct it, and he did nothing. Some top-level CBC executives know about this, but they said nothing. And in fact, I just recently reminded the president of CBC, Catherine Tate. Catherine Tate tweeted about there's a French Radio Canada show called Les Décrypteurs, and it's a show that's dedicated to exposing misinformation. Now, of course, they're exposing misinformation that's not coming from CBC. Exposing misinformation, that's on the internet, but not coming from CBC. And so when I saw this, I tweeted back to Catherine Tate, well, hey, when are you going to do a show about the misinformation coming from the CBC in terms of Sue Montgomery aligned to journalists and not correcting it and this and that, So this was very public. And here's the thing, too. I checked my website later, and because I linked to the blog post, because I blogged about that issue. I blogged about how Sue Montgomery lied to Carol Rapp. And I checked my website later, and sure enough, I got some visits from CBC in Toronto. So they know.
They know, but
they are well informed. They know that I'm accusing Sue Montgomery of lying about clergy sex abuse, serious clergy sex abuse, as I said, pedophilia rape, the worst form of sexual abuse. And the fact that, they basically gave her a platform to lie, and they haven't corrected that. They haven't said, oops, Sue lied to us, we're sorry, and then here's the actual truthful information. I'm still waiting for them to do that. So there's definitely media, mainstream media, that are helping Sue Montgomery to misinform the public. And CTV News is guilty too.
Yeah, you told me CTV is not is not really following up with you, right?
Well, not only that, but they're publishing things that are completely and utterly false, and they're refusing to properly correct it. I think there's actually what happened with CTV is what we're talking about. When I was accused of criminal harassment by Sue Montgomery, I wanted this to be mediatized. I wanted the truth to be known. I wanted the media to know, she basically kind of shut me up. Like I'm accusing Sue Montgomery of covering up clergy sex abuse and being involved in trying to shut down my protest. Because that's another thing is like I'm protesting outside the church, as I've said. I've been doing that for a long time. The churches locally has repeatedly tried to get my protest suppressed by bringing bogus criminal charges against me. So when Sue Montgomery had me charged with criminal harassment, part of that was to shut down my protest in front of the church. Part of it was to keep me out of city council meetings so I couldn't ask her tough questions about her abuse of power and then so on, her past involvement in clergy abuse cover-up and so on. But part of it was to shut down my protest, and she was successful. Basically, I can't protest outside the Unitarian Church of Montreal right now because there's a huge perimeter around it. I was acquitted of the main charge, but a hanging judge found me guilty of breach of conditions because I asked Valerie Swanson a tough question about Sue Montgomery's bad behavior at a city council meeting, and the judge decided that this was a communication with Sue Montgomery, even though she wasn't even in the room when I asked that question. And as far as I'm concerned, he could have been in the room and it still would have been okay, but this judge ruled otherwise. So they basically were able to keep conditions on me, even was acquitted of the main charge. So where were we? Yeah, so CTV. This is pretty egregious what CTV did. So I was like calling CTV's newsroom and lobbying them to report the story, to cover the story. I was talking to Jed Kahane.
Oh, I've heard of him, yeah.
He's right up there. He's like one of the top news editors. And I think the day before my first court appearance, or maybe 2 days before my first court appearance, I called CTV's newsroom to try to make sure that there would be a journalist. And Jed Kahane said to me, you're the only person I know who's being accused of a crime who's like lobbying us to cover the story.
Right.
So I went to my first court appearance. I pleaded not guilty because there was really no, I'm not guilty of criminal harassment. It's simply not true. I'm strongly criticizing Sue Montgomery with good reason, but I'm not like criticizing her in such a way that it gives her reasonable grounds to fear for her safety. And that's what criminal harassment is all about. It's all about A, people have to fear for their safety, and B, they have to have reasonable grounds for that fear. They can't have people charged with criminal harassment because they have paranoid fantasies and so on. So that's it. So I came out of my first court appearance,
right,
and there was a CTV crew. There was a cameraman, and there was Stéphane Giroux, the court reporter.
I've met him. I've met the guy, yeah. With the
glasses.
glasses.
Well, I've met him before, too. So he's there, and the first thing he asked me very aggressively is, did you get the message to leave Sue alone?
So he's on her side.
He's basically telling me, leave Sue alone. He's like, he's not asking me a question. He's telling me, leave Sue alone.
Yeah, but he's not impartial if his job is to report news, which it was news, and he's lobbying on behalf of Sue to keep you out of discussing her, then what is his role? Is his role an enforcer for her, or is his role to be a reporter? It doesn't seem to make sense.
We're not done with him yet. So that's it. Like the very first thing out of his mouth was essentially Stéphane Giroux telling me, leave Sue Montgomery alone. Like he posed it as a question. Did you get the message to leave Sue Montgomery alone? But he said it in such an aggressive way that he's basically telling me, leave her alone. And I said, I can't remember exactly how I asked him. I'm pretty sure I said, no, I didn't get the message to leave Sue Montgomery alone. I think because it has some serious issues to deal with her. And then the next thing he said is what we've already talked about. He said, Sue told me that there's no clergy sex abuse in the Unitarian Church and that there's no Coverup, He didn't told me, Sue's saying you're a liar kind of thing. He didn't say that, but he said what I said. He said, Sue told me there's no clergy sex abuse in the Unitarian Church. Sue told me there's no Coverup. And I told him, I said, look, if Sue Montgomery told you that, she basically totally discredited herself as an investigative journalist. She has described herself as an investigative journalist in the past. And that's what I told him. I said, do your own research. I said, check into it yourself, and all you have to do is go to Google and Google Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse, and you'll find stuff, that's all you got to do. If you just run an appropriate Google search, you will find that, well, actually there has been a certain amount of clergy sex abuse in the Unitarian Church, and you'll find my blog post about how they tried to conceal it. So he didn't do anything. He could have asked me questions, right there on the spot. He could have asked me, well, okay, what's your evidence? What? And I would have answered him. I would have told him what I'm telling you. But he did no such thing. And so they televised the report. I can't remember exactly what was in the report. But then the webpage they put up, for that report, in the webpage, in the written CTV report, it said no such crimes, let alone a cover-up, has been proven in court.
Wow.
So, and they're talking about the sex abuse that I'm alleging, and Sue's complicity in the cover-up. And so here's CTV Montreal putting out on the internet, in writing, no such crimes, let alone a Coverup have been proven in court.
But why can't, the only thing I don't get, I understand all of this and it's good you're explaining it, but why is law enforcement not being the people ahead of all this? Because whatever the media does, they're not being fair, but why isn't law enforcement doing, like, when you look, I'm not a professional lawyer, I'm not a prosecutor, but why don't they try to investigate further, and then once, you know, that gets done, then they'll be able to prosecute these people. That's like my final question I need to know. Like, why are they trying to nail these guys?
I'm talking about cases where people went to jail. So there's no further prosecution to do. Now, I'm sure there's other cases that the church has kept hidden successfully, you know, that I don't even know about. You know, and so the law enforcement might want to investigate the church.
That's what I mean.
What they have kept hidden, you know, where people haven't been prosecuted. But you know, essentially what it comes down to is I'm talking, you know, because as I said, I wanted to protect myself from accusations of libel and slander and so on. So I only blogged about cases that were basically in the public domain already. You know, there are definitely cases where you know, people have not gone to jail for quite serious clergy sexual misconduct. I know that. In some states, even low-level clergy sexual misconduct, such as, you know, a minister having an affair, in quotation marks, with a congregant, you know, in some states it's a crime for a minister to have any kind of sexual relationship or any kind of sexual harassment of a congregant, but in other states that's not the case. And so essentially it's not a criminal act for a minister of a church to have an affair with a congregant's wife. You know,
right, but a child it is.
What?
But underage people,
right,
it is.
Right. Of course. But that's the, you know, that's definitely happened, and I'm sure there's more of it than I know about, and I know about some cases, even where they went to jail, that I haven't blogged about, because I don't know the name of the minister or the name of the church. Like, they were able to...
Okay, so they're making it hard to find.
News, but it was kind of vague, you know, like it didn't say which minister or which church, and so I basically didn't bother about that. But there have definitely been some cases where Unitarian Universalist ministers have sexually abused children and have gone to jail. Not just the one I blogged about, there's others. There's also a case of a Sunday school teacher who is actually similar to what the Reverend Mack Wallace Mitchell did. This is a Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teacher out in Oregon, a gay man married to another gay man, and they adopted a young boy. They adopted a boy, I think he was 11 when they adopted him. And at least one of them, Stephen Craig Bullite, you can Google that. That's Stephen, Steven, Bullite, Bulleit. Craig's the middle name, Craig. If you Google Stephen Craig Bullite, you'll find that this Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teacher was charged, tried, and convicted of multiple sex crimes involving young boys, including the repeated rape of this young boy that they had adopted. So that's not a minister, but it is a Sunday school teacher, and there's that kind of thing going on too. And that's, to me, just as important as a minister doing it. You know, if you've got a Sunday school teacher exploiting children and then even raping them, then, you know, that's just as bad as the minister doing it, and it's worse than some of the less serious forms of clergy sexual misconduct, you know. So getting back to CTV.
Okay, well, we'll let that be we'll sum it up after that story. I'll let you continue.
Right. So when CTV did this, I contacted them and I said, no, this is incorrect. I want you to correct that. I want you to tell the actual truth. And I phoned them and I sent emails and nothing happened and nothing happened and nothing happened. And then I think about a week after they had said that, you know, no such crimes me to report what the actual truth is, and I got on their case again, and you know what they did? They deleted the whole webpage. It doesn't exist anymore. It's like 1984. It's like the memory hole in 1984. They deleted the whole report. It doesn't exist. It was, however, captured by Internet Archive. The Internet Archive is this online thing that goes around and it archives old web pages. And thankfully, it has archived the CTV page when it had that information on it. So there's an archive available that has the information, you know, the false information. So that's what they just completely hid it. Nobody faced any accountability. They still haven't reported. It's like all these, you know, here's what it comes down to. There's literally dozens, if not some hundreds now, of journalists in mainstream media who know that I'm telling the truth about Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse. They know I'm telling the truth about the cover-up and denial of the clergy abuse. They know that I'm telling the truth about Sue Montgomery, about how she's, you know, lying about this and trying to help the church keep it hidden. They know this. They know it's true. They haven't reported that story yet. I'm still trying to get them to report that story. Still working on CBC. And I filed complaints with the Conseil de Presse. The Conseil de Presse rejected 2 out of 3 complaints that I filed about really bad, misleading reports. But they kept my complaints against Yves Laver, who's a very prominent La Presse columnist.
Right,
They recently pretty much whitewashed him. They did acknowledge that he had actually made some false statements, but they said it was minor and blah, blah, blah. And all the important stuff, they whitewashed them. So I'm in the process of appealing that. I'm appealing that decision. I've shown very clearly how there was even, you know, clearly far worse misinformation in Yves Laver's article, and I'm trying to get that dealt with in an appeal. Hopefully I'll win, but I'm not counting on it because they're so biased in favor of journalists. And I just heard from them very recently. I filed the appeal on March 10th. La Presse had it till April 5th to respond to it. About a week ago, or maybe a bit more than a week ago, the Conseil de Presse sent me an email informing me that the La Presse was refusing to respond to my appeal. Like they weren't going to make any comment on it whatsoever, and therefore it would just go straight to the appeals committee. So I found it interesting that La Presse were refusing to, you know, even defend their position. It looks like arrogance, but it could also be strategic, because if they had contested anything that I said, then I would have had the final word in terms of how they contested it. Before it went to the appeals committee, I could have pointed out flaws in their counter arguments before it went to the appeals committee. So they protected themselves from that by not saying anything. So like, you know, keeping silent, as it were, in a court situation. So we'll see what happens. But the most recent email that I got from the Conseil de Presse, which I think was just yesterday, they said it could take many months before it goes to the appeals committee and they make a decision. So I don't know what many months means, but you know, it's not going to be like
not too fast.
Exactly. You know, so
I wanted to thank you.
Wait, you know, but that's the positive is like even, you know, the so-called oversight for journalists, basically a sham. It's basically its real role is to protect journalists from any kind of criticism. They reject, I think, 90% of, or certainly 80% of the, you know, without even looking, like going into any detail, like they arbitrarily reject a lot of complaints without properly investigating them, and then of the ones that they do choose to investigate, you know, the ones where they keep the complaint and do their, you know, so-called investigation, even then they side
right. Well, Robin, I really appreciate the time. This has been Robin Edgar's explanation of Unitarian Universal Sex Abuse and Cover-Up.
Unitarian Universalist.
Unitarian Universal. It's a lot of views. Anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate the time. Eddie G's Music World is signing off for this particular period, March 25th, 2021. So thanks again, Robin. We'll post this, and I want to follow up with you after the show ends. I'll text you I'll send you a couple of questions I wanted to ask about. All right, so thanks again, and say goodbye. And okay, thanks, Robin. Take care. Bye bye.
Thanks, Robin.